The wind was a physical blow, a relentless hand pushing against the frail walls of the cabin, rattling the loose panes of glass. Snow swirled in a frenzy outside, erasing the already indistinct line between the desolate land and the unforgiving sky. Inside, Elara huddled closer to the meager fire, its warmth barely reaching her chilled bones. Each gust sounded like a lament, a reminder of everything she had lost: her husband, the fragile hope they'd built, the small measure of security ripped away by illness, and the unforgiving vastness of this territory. She was alone, isolated, the nearest neighbor miles away, a lifetime across this unforgiving terrain in this weather. Fear was a constant, cold knot in her stomach, twisting tighter with each passing day that brought dwindling supplies and no sign of relief. She ate sparingly, stretching the dried beans and salted meat, each bite a negotiation with hunger and despair. Her hands, chapped and raw from labor, trembled as she adjusted a piece of wood in the hearth. This was her existence now. Survival, minute by agonizing minute, against a world that seemed determined to break her. Then a sound. Not the wind, but something else. A soft thud, followed by a groan, muffled by the storm. Elara froze, every muscle tensing. Wild animals sometimes sought shelter near structures, but this sounded human. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Strangers were rare, often dangerous in these parts. Bandits, deserters, men desperate enough to take what little she had. Every instinct screamed at her to extinguish the fire, hide, pretend she wasn't there. But the groan came again, weaker this time, a sound of profound suffering. Hesitation warred with a flicker of something else, curiosity, perhaps, or a desperate, foolish hope that it might be someone offering help, though she knew better. Mostly, it was a morbid pull, an inability to ignore the presence outside her door, suffering alone in the storm, much like she suffered within her walls. Driven by a compulsion she couldn't name, Elara cautiously rose. She took the small, heavy iron poker from beside the hearth, her only weapon. The floorboards creaked beneath her worn boots. The cold air pressed in around her as she approached the door. She peered through a crack in the frame, straining to see through the swirling snow. A dark shape lay slumped against the cabin wall near the entrance. It wasn't an animal. It was a man, clad in the mud-stained, tattered remnants of a Union soldier's uniform. He lay still, half buried in a drift, one arm flung out, a dark stain spreading across the snow near his chest. The sight sent a fresh wave of fear through her. Soldiers meant trouble, meant war, meant violence. But he was clearly wounded, perhaps dying. Another groan, softer, a whisper of pain. He looked young, despite the grime and the tangled hair plastered to his forehead. His face was pale, slack with pain or unconsciousness. A sudden, sharp image flashed in Elara's mind. Her husband, laid low by fever, the helplessness she'd felt then mirroring the helplessness she felt now, compounded by the danger the stranger represented. Yet, the shared vulnerability, the simple fact of a human being in desperate need, chipped away at her fear. She couldn't leave him there to die. Not yet. Not without trying. It was a decision made in a heartbeat, driven by a complex mix of fear, pity, and a deep-seated reluctance to let another soul perish within earshot while she had shelter and a spark of life. With trembling hands, she unbolted the door, the cold air rushing in, stealing the little warmth the fire provided. She opened it only a crack, peering out again. The soldier didn't move. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door wider, stepping out into the biting wind. The cold hit her like a fist. She knelt beside him, the poker forgotten. His skin was icy to the touch. His breathing was shallow, ragged. The wound on his side looked bad, soaked through his uniform coat and shirt. Lifting him would be impossible alone, even if he were conscious. She had to get him inside. It was madness, utter madness, bringing a stranger, a soldier, into her isolated refuge. He could be a criminal, an enemy, a harbinger of the very violence she sought to escape. But the shared vulnerability of life flickering against the storm was a bond forged in that moment. Gritting her teeth, She grabbed the soldier by his shoulders and began to pull, inch by painful inch, towards the cabin door. The snow resistance was immense, his weight dead. Each tug was a strain on her muscles, a battle against the elements and her own fear. But she pulled. She had to. The storm howled its disapproval, the wind whipping her hair across her face, blurring her vision with tears she didn't dare shed. It felt like dragging the weight of the world, a world that offered only burdens, towards the fragile safety of her small, solitary existence. Dragging the soldier inside was an ordeal. He was heavy, a dead weight of bone and muscle, his body limp and unresponsive. Alara braced her feet against the doorframe and pulled, her back protesting, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Snow melted from his uniform, forming puddles on her floor. Finally, she managed to get him fully inside, slamming the door shut against the relentless wind. The sudden silence after the storm's roar was almost as jarring as the sight of the unconscious man sprawled on her floor. He lay there, muddy and bleeding, a stark, terrifying disruption in the quiet, predictable rhythm of her solitary struggle. Her immediate concern was the wound. She needed light. Her hands still shaking, she lit a second lamp, the flickering yellow glow pushing back the deep shadows in the cabin. She knelt beside him again, forcing herself to ignore the gore. She fumbled with the buttons on his uniform coat, her fingers clumsy with cold and fear. The coat was stiff with dried blood and ice. Beneath it, his shirt was soaked through. The wound was a ragged tear in his side, high up, just below the ribcage. It looked deep. He was losing blood, too much blood. As she worked to peel away the saturated cloth, her fingers brushed against something beneath the layers of soaked fabric. It wasn't the expected flatness of a man's chest. There was a subtle curve, a softness that felt profoundly out of place under the rough wool and canvas. Confusion, sharp and sudden, pierced through her fear. She hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, carefully, she continued to unbutton the shirt, pushing aside the wet cloth. As the fabric parted, revealing the skin beneath, her eyes widened in disbelief. It wasn't the chest of a man. Her gaze traveled up to the jawline, the cheekbones, softer than she had initially registered beneath the grime. Then she saw it clearly, undeniable beneath the tangled hair. The absence of stubble, the smoother skin. The soldier was a woman. The revelation hit Alara with the force of a physical blow, stunning her into silence. A woman, dressed as a man, fighting in the war, wounded, and now in her cabin. The fear returned, multiplied. Why was she disguised? Who was she hiding from? Was it just the army? Or something worse? Enemies? If someone was hunting her, they might come looking and find Alara. Her small, isolated refuge was no longer safe. She had unknowingly invited danger to her doorstep, a secret that could cost her everything. She stared at the woman's unconscious face, a jumble of questions and renewed fear swirling in her mind. She should turn her out, drag her back into the snow, let nature take its course. It was the sensible thing to do, the safe thing. But the woman was bleeding, helpless, perhaps dying. And she was a woman like Alara. A strange, unsettling kinship bloomed alongside the fear. This woman, defying convention, risking her life, was clearly fleeing something terrible. And Alara, who understood fleeing and hiding in her own way, found herself unable to abandon her. With a heavy sigh that felt like it came from the depths of her soul, Alara pushed the thought of casting her out away. For now, she had to tend to the wound. Her hands, though still shaking, became more purposeful. She fetched clean rags, boiled water over the fire, preparing to clean the wound as best she could. She worked in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the woman's shallow breathing. She gently cut away the blood-soaked fabric around the wound. The cut was deep but thankfully didn't seem to have hit bone or vital organs, though the bleeding was persistent. She cleaned it carefully, the woman stirring and moaning softly at the pain, but remaining unconscious. Alara bandaged it tightly with strips of clean linen, her movements precise despite her inner turmoil. As she worked, she looked at the woman's face again. In the lamplight, without the grime, she could see a strength in the set of her jaw, a resilience etched even in unconsciousness. She was young, perhaps younger than Alara. What life had driven her to this? What had she seen? What had she done? Alara pulled a blanket over the woman, trying to warm her. She moved with a quiet determination, the initial shock giving way to a pragmatic necessity. This secret was hers now. She had to protect it, and in doing so, she had to protect this woman. It was a dangerous gamble, born of desperation and a flicker of empathy in the vast, cold loneliness. Days blurred into a quiet routine of tending. The soldier, whom Alara mentally started calling Sarah, though she knew not her name, remained mostly unresponsive, drifting in and out of consciousness. When she was awake, her eyes, a startlingly clear gray, would fix on Alara with an intense, almost wary gaze, but she said little, her voice a hoarse whisper. Alara offered sips of water, spoonfuls of thin broth. She changed the bandage, noting with a quiet sense of relief that the bleeding had stopped and the wound, though angry, showed no immediate signs of infection. It was a slow, uncertain vigil. During these days, Alara observed the woman closely. Even in her weakened state, there was a stillness about her, a quiet watchfulness that spoke of ingrained caution. Her hands, though pale, were calloused, the fingers long and capable. Her body, thin and taut, held the underlying strength of someone used to hardship and physical exertion. Alara found herself studying the lines etched around the woman's eyes, the subtle way her jaw would clench even in sleep. She was not just a soldier. She was a survivor, marked by experiences Alara could only guess at. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken questions and the weight of the secret. Alara didn't press for answers. She sensed that forcing conversation would only push the woman further away. Trust, if it were to come at all, would have to be earned in the quiet moments, through actions rather than words. Alara simply continued to care for her, offering warmth, food, clean bandages. It was a small act of defiance against the harshness of their reality, a fragile bond being woven from necessity and a shared vulnerability. One afternoon, Sarah was awake. Her eyes were clear, less clouded by pain. She watched Alara as she stirred the stew over the fire. "Why?" Sarah's voice was a low rasp, unused. Alara paused, turning to look at her. "Why what? Why did you bring me in?" Alara shrugged, turning back to the fire. "You were dying." "Many die," Sarah said, her gaze steady. "In the snow. Alone." Alara stirred the stew, the silence stretching. "I couldn't leave you." It was the truth, simple and complex. She wouldn't elaborate. Sarah was silent for a long moment. "My name is Sarah." Alara's heart gave a small lurch, the first offering of trust. "Alara." Sarah gave a faint nod. "Thank you, Alara." It was a small exchange, but it shifted something in the air between them. Acknowledgement, the beginning of a connection. As Sarah slowly regained strength, she began to move around the cabin, tentatively at first, then with more purpose. She was quiet, helping with small chores without being asked, fetching water from the well, chopping kindling, repairing a loose shutter. Her movements were efficient, economical. Alara noticed the way Sarah's gaze would constantly sweep the perimeter outside the windows, a trained vigilance Alara hadn't possessed. It was a silent reminder of the danger that still lingered, the enemies Sarah might have. One evening, as Alara was patching a worn quilt by lamplight, Sarah spoke again, her voice stronger now. "Someone might be looking for me." Alara stopped sewing, her needle poised. "Who?" Sarah hesitated. "Men. Who don't want me found." It was vague, but the intensity in her eyes left no doubt about the threat. "I carry things, information, that others want very badly." Alara swallowed, the knot of fear tightening again. "If they find you here, they won't hesitate," Sarah finished for her, her voice flat, "to do whatever they need to do, to silence anyone who helped." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Alara looked at Sarah, seeing not just a wounded soldier, but a woman carrying a dangerous burden, a burden she had now shared with Alara. The choice she had made in the storm had bound their fates together. Her vulnerability had transformed into a quiet, fierce determination. She had protected Sarah, and now, together, they would face whatever came. The first sign was subtle. A horse track in the thawing mud near the edge of the woods, where no track should be. Alara saw it first, her gut clenching. She showed Sarah, whose eyes narrowed, scanning the surrounding trees with an unnerving intensity. "They're moving slow," Sarah murmured, casing the area, "or unsure if I came this way." The tension in the small cabin became a palpable thing, thick and heavy. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind, sounded like an approaching threat. Sarah seemed to become even more alert, her movements silent and precise. She checked the cabin's defenses, reinforced the door, showed Alara how to load the old rifle her husband had kept, a weapon Alara had never touched. Sarah's quiet competence was a strange comfort, a counterpoint to Alara's deep-seated fear. Alara, in turn, knew the land, knew the hiding spots, the sounds the weather made. Their skills, born of different hardships, complemented each other. The days that followed were a study in quiet dread. They kept the fire low, moved in silence, watching, waiting. The tracks reappeared closer, bolder. They were being hunted. Alara's fear was still present, a cold stone in her stomach, but it was overlaid with a steely resolve she hadn't known she possessed. This was no longer just about survival. It was about defending the fragile sanctuary she had built, the fragile connection she had formed. The night they came was clear, cold. The moon was a sliver in the inky sky, casting long, eerie shadows. Sarah was awake, sitting near the window, rifle across her lap. Alara lay on her cot, pretending to sleep, every nerve ending screaming. She heard the horses first, faint in the distance, then growing louder, closer. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Sarah didn't move, didn't make a sound. The riders stopped some distance from the cabin. Silence. Then a low call. A man's voice, hard and flat. "We know you're in there. Thomas." Sarah didn't stir. Alara felt a tremor run through her. They knew the disguise. Another call, closer this time. "Come out, Thomas. Make it easy." Sarah rose silently, moving to the side of the window, out of the direct moonlight. She checked the rifle's action. Alara slid off her cot, grabbing the poker again, a futile weapon against guns, but a symbol of her refusal to cower. She stood beside Sarah, looking up at her. Sarah met her gaze. Her gray eyes hard but held a flicker of something Alara couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude, perhaps, or shared determination. There was no need for words. A figure moved from the tree line towards the cabin. Then another. Two men, moving cautiously. Sarah raised the rifle. The sound of the shot shattered the night stillness, deafening inside the small cabin. One of the figures cried out, stumbling back into the shadows. The other dropped, then scrabbled for cover. Immediately, shots rang out, hitting the cabin walls, splintering wood. Alara ducked, pulling Sarah down with her. "Back way," Alara whispered, gesturing to the small rear window. Sarah shook her head, pointing towards the other side of the cabin. "They'll expect that. My pack, it's out back." Diversion, her gaze was focused, assessing. The stoic soldier reasserted itself. There was a brief lull in the firing. "Fire!" a voice roared from outside. They heard the crackle of flames catching dry wood near the front corner of the cabin. They were trying to burn them out. "Go!" Sarah ordered, pushing Alara towards the back wall, away from the growing heat. "Get out, get into the woods. Don't look back." "No," Alara said, her voice firm. "Not without you." Sarah stared at her for a second, surprise flickering in her eyes. Then, a decisive nod. "All right, my pack quickly. Then we move. Stay low." They crawled towards the rear of the cabin, heat licking at their backs. Sarah broke the glass in the small window with the butt of the rifle. Cold air rushed in, mixed with the smell of smoke. Sarah hoisted herself through, dropping lightly to the ground. Alara followed clumsily. Outside, Flames were spreading quickly at the front of the cabin. Gunshots erupted again, aimed at the front entrance. "My pack," Sarah hissed, pointing to where she'd stashed her saddlebag behind a small woodpile. Alara scrambled towards it, retrieving the heavy leather bag. Sarah covered her, firing a quick shot towards the front to draw attention. "Now the woods." Sarah grabbed Alara's arm. They ran, low to the ground, towards the dark, protective embrace of the trees. The burning cabin illuminated their path for a moment, casting long, dancing shadows. They heard shouts, the sound of men realizing their targets were escaping. More shots followed, whizzing past them, but they were swallowed by the darkness of the forest. They didn't stop until their lungs burned and the sounds of the pursuit faded behind them. They collapsed in a snowy clearing, gasping for air, watching the orange glow of the burning cabin against the night sky. It was gone. Their sanctuary, Alara's last link to her past life, reduced to ashes. Despair threatened to overwhelm her. But then she felt Sarah's hand on her arm, a firm, comforting pressure. They rested, catching their breath. The danger wasn't over, not by a long shot. They were exposed, vulnerable, but they were together. Alara looked at Sarah, seeing not the dangerous soldier, but the woman who had fought by her side, whose strength and resilience had intertwined with her own newfound courage. They had faced the fire, both literal and figurative, and emerged. Sitting there in the cold night, watching the cabin burn, Alara felt a profound shift within her. The timid, fearful widow was gone, consumed by the flames. In her place was someone harder, stronger, forged in the crucible of shared peril. She had been vulnerable, alone in her grief and fear. Now, she was still in danger, still facing an uncertain future, but she was not alone. She had found a partner, an unexpected ally, a bond forged in secrecy and survival. The world was still harsh, still unpredictable, but they would face it together. They had lost the cabin, lost a place, but they had found each other, found strength in their partnership. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Alara felt a flicker of hope, a quiet, resilient spark burning in the darkness. They would find a way. They had to.